What is up, fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Favale coming at you with another NBA team look ahead of the 22-23 NBA season. We are on at long last to the Brooklyn Nets, and I'm super excited to get to speak with for the first time Matt Brooks. He covers the Nets for Nets Daily. They are ubiquitous in the Nets media circle, so you, of course, know who they are. And he does some NBA content for basketball news. And he's the host of the Clear Out podcast, also under the Blue Wire umbrella, at Matt Brooks NBA. Follow him on Twitter immediately, and it's spelled exactly as it sounds. Matt, I have many questions for you, but the most important of which is, how the heck are you doing?
Hanging in there. This is pretty good. This is the most refreshed I've felt coming into a season. Media day, there was no Zoom going on like last year. Last year, of course, Kyrie zoomed into to media day because he was unable to go because of New York health regulations, which I think was a precursor for the season. This year, everything's gone very smoothly so far. So I'm doing well.
That's awesome. And, this was a team when I'm trying to do all these look aheads, I map out teams I need to wait. And I hate asking people too close to the start of the season because I know it's busy. But then there are teams where I'm like, they're so combustible or potentially dramatic. I can't ask them to go too early because this will just become outdated. And I was looking at the Nets. I'm like, maybe they got all the drama out of their system, but I waited anyway. But it really seems like we were just talking about, not for the whole year, but like for now, looking at training camp and being able to focus on the roster, how they'll play. So much shit happened over the offseason that was almost like, okay, well, they checked all those boxes, and now we can actually just focus on like what this team might actually be.
Yeah, I think KD had a quote. I think that was 2 days ago. Yeah, 2 days ago at practice, he was talking about kind of we're going to learn who we are when we go through a losing streak, which I thought was like kind of like it's super accurate. It's also just kind of like that's the best way to describe the Nets right now. Like things are good right now. We're not going to know until there's an injury or if they go through a little skid. I mean, they have a pretty tough schedule, even just starting out. I think they play the Grizzlies, Raptors, Bucks, and two other teams that are Dallas, I think, is one of them. So they have like a pretty tough schedule to start. And that's where we're really going to learn about who the Nets are. But for now, yeah, vibes are good. Seems like good things are happening so far.
We do have to start there, though, with everything that happened over the offseason, the Kyrie contract negotiations, him looking for a sign and trade or a different team not being able to find it. Kevin Durant reportedly requesting a trade. Kevin Durant reportedly wanting Steve Nash and Sean Marks fired. Everyone's just still here. Like they're all just still here. Are we really supposed to believe that this is all okay now and they can coexist for at least the entire season?
I mean, I guess I feel like I'll say this, like, I think it's been a really humbling last year for every star and really everybody involved with the Nets. The early exit, I think, played a pretty big role in Durant, specifically wanting to leave. I think that was humbling for the front office, for the coaching staff. I think it's fair to say the Nets have not taken this regular season super seriously in years past, resting guys. I just don't know how much urgency there was this year. There feels like there's a little bit more from top down, at least from front office to coaching staff. And then for the players, I mean, Kyrie had a very humbling summer, which he addressed in media day. I thought that was really interesting. Basically saying, hey, like, I'll be real. Like, I tried to look for other suitors and there wasn't really anything there, which has been pretty widely reported. Ben Simmons is, of course, like looking to come back and just figure out a good home for himself. I think it's been a very humbling year for him. And then Durant, being one of the three most marketable stars, biggest stars in the league, asked for a trade and was not able to get traded. So it's like everybody's been humbled in different ways. I mean, we can be honest. And,
right.
Like, let's be real. So I think, for everybody involved, it was pretty humbling. And now it's like we're kind of at ground zero. We're going to see where it goes.
If you had to like, not even predict, but it's just like, are you at the point where you're trying to analyze what this team is and can become, but you also in the back of your mind, in the middle of your mind, at the fore of your mind, just have to brace yourself for like fucking anything, like not even the worst, just like something you don't even see, like, Kyrie, like start like quitting and starting a career as like a musician or like, you could tell me any scenario about this team, anything. And I would just be like, you know what? Yeah. Okay. I see it.
Yeah, I've like pretty much gone through everything in my head that could happen. Like it would be like Joe Harris, the ankle isn't what, two surgeries later he's still not 100%. Seth Curry has trouble getting back from his ankle surgery. TJ Warren is a hologram. Like and then they start out what, like 5-10. And then Nash gets fired, then Durant's gone at the deadline. Like it's like everything bad that can happen will happen before February. So it's like if they can just get through that stretch, I actually feel pretty good about them.
Man, a Kevin Durant mid-season trade would just be weird. I'm trying to remember when the last time like a top 5 player was traded in the middle of the season. I don't know that James Harden was not playing at that level when he was
Yeah.
in Houston and came to Brooklyn at least. So that would be wild. You had mentioned you're talking about their start to the season. They have some built-in excuses if things go wrong, like because the TJ Warren stuff, we know he's not ready. I thought that was a super intriguing signing, though, if he can get on the court at all.
Yeah.
But are there any like long-term concerns for Seth Curry still being out with his ankle issue? They're all foot issues. And then Joe Harris, like, is this just precautionary that they've held him out, or is this something that could be, lingering?
Yeah, they're saying it's precautionary with Joe. They're saying like it's just soreness from not playing for a while, which I mean, I'm not going to sit here and speculate on that. I guess I'm just like I'm just sort of watching that situation from afar and being like, all right, is this going to be a lingering thing? Is it going to be he's able to play for 2 games and then he's not, fully like he's a guy that was such a rock for them and really rarely miss games. So now if that's going to be a thing with him where he's in and out of the lineup this year, that's something to watch. And then, yeah, I mean, Seth, it seems like he said he was like 85, 90%. I feel a little better about him in a way, mostly because he hasn't had 2 surgeries on the same left ankle in the last year, which is not a good sign. But, I think, I mean, with the Nets luck, both of those guys are going to be hurt throughout the year, but I feel like you're going to get one or the other at some point. Maybe get both.
Is Seth available for do you think he'll be available for opening night? Like he hasn't even done 5-on-5 work. I was reading, I think just yesterday. And so they seem so optimistic. And if you're at 85 to 90%, like that's only 85 to 90% of, I can begin like 5-on-5 work, 85 to 90%. I'm not all the way back.
Yeah, especially for a team that's as cautious as the Nets. And I just feel like the last couple of years, if anything, it's made them more cautious, with the James Harden thing, for example, 2 years ago, they bring him back and he re-aggravates the hamstring, I think, against the Knicks. And so I feel like in a way, if he's not already doing 5-on-5, I don't know how long he'll be out, but I certainly don't think he'll be there for opening night.
That kind of sucks. But again, that's if things go off the rails, it's like, oh, well, they don't have Seth Curry, or I guess at that point, though, it's if Joe Harris is back and then you're not really, do we know anything additionally on TJ Warren other than we don't think he's a hologram?
He's supposed to be reevaluated in November. That's kind of the timeline they've been sticking to. Who knows? I mean, like if you asked me, do I think I'm going to see him play basketball in 2022? I'd probably say no, but that's just because November is like, then you only have another month. You're just reevaluating. Like you're not like, all right, you're going to get out there and do 5-on-5. Like it's like, we're going to be like, hey, we're just going to kick this down the road and see where you're at. I will say like on the built-in excuse thing, I do feel like that's a little bit last 2 years Netsy, where they're like, well, and that was always something that Nash would do after, even after the Boston series. It was like, like we never really got our team together. We just never got that continuity. And like at a certain point, it's like, all right, like how many times are we going to keep throwing this excuse out there in a way? Like at a certain point, you have who you have and you have to win games that way. So I would hope they don't do that. I think that would be indicative of this team not growing from what they've learned over the last couple of years.
I will say I am just mentally preparing for TJ Warren not to like be back until almost the playoffs, because that they got him at the minimum, unless he's just in love with Brooklyn or really wanted to play with like Day'Ron Sharpe or something for some reason. There are so many teams where I was like, I would love to know what his medical said, because there are just so many teams where I would have thrown at least the full mini MLE at him for a year and said, yeah, you don't have to play until 2023, but as long as you're here, we'll pay you.
Yeah, they got right in front of that pretty quickly with TJ, just being like, yeah, we're going to reevaluate him. Like there wasn't any, this was not something they were wavering on. So that's like, for me, I heard that right away and I was like, I don't know. I mean, I don't even know, like if they do get him back, let's say he comes back as late as after the All-Star break, like, do you try to get him into the rotation, or do you already kind of have your rotation set and it's like, all right, well, I don't know what we're going to do here. Like I'm not, I really like TJ. I think he like represents a mold of a player that can be super beneficial for the team. But it really depends on like when he's able to get back. And, you know, I don't know. I'm not penciling him in as like a guy they're going to be leaning on, I guess.
And I think probably his most valuable attribute to them is the way he improved on ball defensively in Indiana. And that's just something it's like, well, can you count on that when he hasn't played basketball in 2 years and has come back from his foot thing?
Yeah. And like I did a whole big like 9-minute video. It was like really one of the big off-season projects I did on him. And like the two things that stood out to me and I think would be really helpful for the Nets was one, like, yes, the on-ball defense that you mentioned. I also really like that they're kind of mixing in some degree of drop, some degree of switching. I think he'd probably look a little better in a switching scheme where he doesn't have to navigate screens as much. That's something I'm pretty high on for him. And then just the way he plays off ball, his cutting, like based on how much movement this team is already playing with, that guy's going to be really, really beneficial for what they're doing. But again, I mean, he needs to get on the floor to actually do that.
I'm sure everyone who's listening expected us to devote the first huge portion of the podcast to Seth Curry, Joe Harris, and TJ Warren. That was always going to be the plan. Ben Simmons is on this team and playing basketball, which has been fun to see. What have just been your early impressions of his fit on offense? Anything that's pleasantly surprised you? Anything that still concerned you leading into the regular season? And this is with the caveat all preseason is preseason. But what are your early impressions on him?
Yeah, like, you know, I mean, it's so cliche, but his aggressiveness is really going to dictate what he looks like night to night. And that's actually the big thing I'm watching for in the first month is not what he's doing on offense, not what he's doing on defense, although he brings it pretty much every game defensively. No, it's like, just what is it like to track Ben Simmons for a whole month? Like, how many games are you like, I don't really know what we got from Ben there. It's like, wow, this was the Ben Simmons, this like athletic Draymond Green idea that we've kind of fetishized. Is that kind of what we're getting day to day? So that's what I'm really curious about. I think yesterday against the Bucks, again, we talked about this before we went live here. I don't want to glean too much from preseason in general. I don't know. You can guess. I mostly look for schemes and just general macro ideas on teams, but I thought it was kind of interesting how they used him a little bit, using him in the short roll, letting him make plays. I've always kind of, when thinking about the fit between him and Nic Claxton, which on paper can be clunky, I've always compared a little bit to a Brooklyn version of Lob City, where you have Claxton hovering around the dunker spots, and then you have Simmons kind of playing in the Blake role, where he's going to be short rolling. And he even took a floater yesterday, which will be nice because defenses have no reason to really defend him unless he's around the rim. So that, I think, is what I'm watching for, is just, do they change his utilization that much? Because in the first game that they played in the preseason, he's handling the ball and pick and roll. He's like running screen and roll with Nic Claxton. Like, I just don't have any interest in seeing that. That to me is
I would imagine the points per possession on that will end up being pretty low if they run that all season.
Yeah, I mean, it's literally like they run it, he stops at the elbow, and they reset, and now they're at the top of the key with Kyrie or KD with the ball with less time on the shot clock. Like, it's pointless offense.
Is there have you noticed, or would you be able to guess what would be the biggest difference on how he's used offensively in Brooklyn versus what we know about all the stuff he did in Philly?
I don't think they've changed that much of what he's doing on offense. I think we're probably going to start seeing that a little bit more over the next month. I actually asked Nash about that 2 days ago at practice. And one of the things he mentioned was just like, the short rolling stuff, whatever he's doing in terms of being in open space when they have the advantage, the 4-on-3 advantage offensively. The other thing that I thought was really interesting, and I would like to see quite a bit, is just him attacking from the second side. So if you can kind of use him as a taller Bruce Brown and have him, make those 45 cuts it's kind of slashing cuts from the wings, or even cutting along the baseline. I think that's pretty interesting way to use him as well, and take advantage of how dynamic he is that way.
How much do you think they're invested in playing him and Nic Claxton together for long stretches?
Probably depends on the matchup, right? Like it against the Bucks, it made sense because you look at them play the Bucks and it's like, this is a lot different than last year. This team isn't suddenly dwarfed in size. They have 3 guys that are over 6'10", making up their front court, and Durant, Claxton and Simmons. So I think that will depend on the matchup. You're not going to be able to do that against every team. And that'll be a big test for Steve Nash, is like, how quick is his hook for realizing, hey, this is probably not the right way to do this. That I think will be a big test, but in certain games, it's going to look really good.
Do you envision that Simmons is going to play, and Nash has talked about this, and I think Simmons has even mentioned it. Do you anticipate Simmons playing like meaningful minutes as sort of the backup five or at the five? And you go through the roster, and like there's Nic Claxton, Day'Ron Sharpe, and then you're running out of centers anyway.
Yeah.
So Ben Simmons just might end up there organically, but if he's playing with Markieff Morris, is he technically like the center in that situation? But do you think that they're invested in that model?
Yeah, it seems like it. Kind of depends on when you're doing it. Is that like, a crunch time lineup? I'd probably lean that way. It also depends on like what the fit looks like against certain teams of Nick and Ben. As I just said, like that, I think will really decide how much you're seeing Ben at center. Because defensively, those two guys are switchable. It just makes them, that's a lot of length that you're throwing at teams, and that helps your rebounding, have those two guys together. But offensively, it can really look clunky. Even if you are using Ben in ways where he's, short rolling, or if they, use him as a screener and like split cuts, or use Nick as the screener in split cuts, it still can just look clunky if those sets don't work. And then it's like, all right, we're trying to run, whatever pick and roll or ISO, and we have these two guys that are kind of just hanging out of the dunker spot. So it really will depend on like the matchup, I think, and how much they're going to lean on Bennett center.
I don't know that I can picture him like defensively as a center, like without someone else who's on the court to do the center responsibilities. We didn't see a lot of it in Philly, and then the minutes we saw was just like it wasn't great, and he even looked out of his element there. And so I'm just very curious to see if they do wind up leaning on that model, even if it's just for certain matchups, trying to scale ahead to a potential playoff series. I guess because we haven't seen it a ton, I just can't envision what that looks like defensively for him even.
Yeah, I mean, he's just not a shot blocker. Like, he's got I think a 7-foot wingspan as a 6'11" guy. So like not super long arms, not in that way where like Durant has a 7'5" wingspan. Like maybe that's who you're not going to lean on Durant at center, but maybe you're like, hey, we're going to play Ben at center, and we're just going to have to hope that Durant is extremely dialed in as like a weak side guy. So I think, I don't love it, but I guess I like it a little bit more next to Durant.
Steve Nash has talked about, and you've written about, how the Nets are adding wrinkles to their offense, a lot of which includes, and you've talked about some of them already, just more off-ball movement in general, which isn't what I think, Durant playing for the Warriors, sure, but hasn't been a harbinger necessarily of teams he and Kyrie have played for, and certainly not in Brooklyn before. What have you thought about some of the stuff they tried to implement in preseason? I think the more important question is, do you buy into it translating to the way that they're going to play in the regular season?
Yeah, they've implemented, I guess certain actions and sets that like NBA Twitter nerds love. Like, oh, they're running some veer action where their centers are setting a ball screen and then setting a screen elsewhere. They're running Spain pick and roll. Just
you have to, if you want NBA Twitter on your side, you have to run Spain pick and roll.
You have to, yeah. If exactly. So like they're doing a bunch of stuff like that, which is cool. They're adding more wrinkles to the offense than just straight high pick and roll and Chicago action. They ran a lot of that last year. And that's great. But what I like for me personally is how much they're diversifying those actions. They're combining them in different ways. They ran Chicago a couple times yesterday, and it wasn't just like, hey, we're going to have Durant take the ball down, get the ball to Nic Claxton, and then somebody's going to set a screen for Joe Harris or Kyrie or whatever. No, they would run like a different screening action beforehand. They'd have a guy cut through the paint to drag away the weak side defender. Like, they're doing a bunch of different things before and after these sets that they just weren't doing last year. It's not as simplified, I think, in a way. And that for me, like, is so interesting because you have so many dynamic offensive players. If you're using them together versus just having guys fill space and just, I guess essentially be floor spacers on the weak side and fill the corners and wings, it just makes you a lot tougher to deal with. And there's just a lot more for the defense to have to keep track of. So that's the stuff I'm really excited about. Yeah, like the veer action, Spain pick and roll, that stuff is fun, but the stuff you really want to watch is what they're doing before and after we get to those recognizable actions.
Who do you think, if they're going to play this way a lot, it ends up being the biggest adjustment for an offense when you're looking at their three stars in Kyrie, KD, and Simmons? It does feel like it might be a little bit. I don't even know. I was going to say a little bit more natural for Simmons, but I feel like that might even be the incorrect answer.
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like in a way it's probably Kyrie and KD in a sense, just because those guys are so good at creating their own offense that if they go through a stretch where they're a little bit in the mud and some of the movement they're working or they like to run isn't working, I wonder if that just turns into, all right, well, just get me the ball. I'm going to get us out of this stretch. And that becomes like something that, it doesn't, I mean, it's never going to work against the team because those guys are so good at creating their own offense, but they do get away from, I think what makes them interesting this year. So yeah, I think that's something I would watch. And that also just like depends on the opponent. If you're playing a team that switches a bunch, like the team I'm really interested to see them play is Boston. Boston's got so many like-sized guys. If you're just switching a lot of these actions and just keeping the ball in front versus all this movement, that to me is like, all right, we're really going to get a taste of like how effective all this stuff is that this coaching staff is putting in place. And then we'll really learn like, all right, are the Nets going to stick to their guns and say, hey, we're going to run movement and hopefully we can tire out the opponent of just keeping that much focus on our guys? Or are we going to just kind of devolve into ISO ball essentially?
It's almost like the symptom of when you break it down by a game where it's a team goes through their offense for the first 3.5 quarters, but then everything like bogs down or they deviate from it in crunch time or just towards the end of the fourth quarter. And it could very much be like that in the offseason, preseason. You're talking about doing all this stuff. You're implementing some of this stuff. Games that matter start, and you're not doing it as much anymore.
Yeah, that's a good point. And as I said, like I think we'll learn pretty quickly who the Nets are in terms of if they go through a losing stretch. And that would be the thing I'd watch for. It's like, all right, does anything change with how they're playing? Does Simmons become less involved or look more passive? Or they just literally say, hey, we're just going to go get the ball to our two best players because we're not playing right now and we need to start playing better. Like that's the stuff I think you're worried about, along with like whatever drama could come from this team, which is quite a bit of drama.
there's the ceiling is the roof, as Michael Jordan would say. One of the things that I've thought about with this team is how should Steve Nash stagger the star minutes. And my first inclination was I want Ben Simmons to be like the best version of Ben Simmons. And so I was like, oh, Ben Simmons with the bench. And then I'm like, harkening back to the days where the Sixers did that and it was terrible. But then also you're not trying to play him with Dwight Howard and Matisse Thybulle at the same time in Brooklyn. Which star is it most important to have like those staggered units with? I ended up landing on KD, but I'm just curious what your thoughts are with it.
I'm with you. The Ben Simmons solo star minutes have not been great, I think, so far. Again, preseason, whatever. But like, I just think you can glean certain things from like, just watching how the offense flows, who has the ball in their hands. And then it depends a lot more on what Simmons can do in the half court, which I think we know is like not his strength, especially with the ball in hand versus, Durant. I mean, look, and that's the other thing, like if you're kind of wondering like, hey, we need to find moments where Durant can get his and create his own offense or Kyrie can create his own offense, like those solo units are the time to do that. So I think you're probably going to take one guy or the other. I've always liked Durant more with, a set of role players than Kyrie. I think Kyrie his stature works against him a little bit in that setting. And then just in general, like I think Durant's better at finding guys' shots than Kyrie and attracts more defensive attention. Yeah. So that for me is what I would go with as well.
I'm just wondering if, because they have the ability at some point to surround, it could be Ben Simmons and then as Matt Moore of Action Network would say, a fuck ton of shooting. I just wonder if those units without Kyrie and KD could eventually work. But I came to the same conclusion that you did, just because I think I have PTSD from some of those minutes they played in Philly with him and Dwight Howard.
Yeah, and it's just like, I mean, you could put all the shooting you want around Ben, and like you could run like pick and pop action or whatever. You could use Ben as a screener, but it's like I just need somebody that I know can get into the paint and spray out. And if it's just Ben with no other stars and guys that are going to attract a ton of offensive attention or defensive attention, then I just don't know if that's super feasible. It might sound a lot better than it looks.
This might not be an issue because of everything we discussed at the top of this podcast with the durability of this roster. Does Cam Thomas get squeezed out of this rotation when they're at full strength?
I think so. And I like Cam. I honestly, there's a couple rookies they have on this roster that I feel like our second, third team guys. Cam feels like somebody he just sort of need. I mean, he just needs like more usage, and I like Cam. Like I think he can be a good player, a good scorer. I don't know what the ceiling is for him, but I think it can be pretty high. I don't think it's going to happen here. I was always kind of puzzled when they made that pick when they did, because I was just like, I don't know how like a guy that's leading, whatever, leading college in scoring is going to be able to thrive on this team with like scores essentially. Kessler Edwards is another guy where it's like, I really like that guy. I think the big thing for him is just like, believing in himself, not to be too cliche. And with a team where there's so much pressure to succeed and so many guys kind of now fighting for that wing position, I feel like he's another guy that's like, I'm really going to like him when he's, I don't know, on the Raptors or something like that in a couple of years. One of the 9,006-8 guys they've got.
I was with Kessler Edwards, though. I was just wondering if TJ Warren's out. Kevin Durant's not really a wing. Royce O'Neal's small. I guess Joe Harris is like kind of a wing, but skews more swingman. If they just want to have like some true wing minutes, like you could just throw out Edwards at 6'7" or 6'8", whatever he's standing at.
Yeah, I feel like I just like confidence is the big thing for him, and that's why I say like second, third team. Like it's not even that he's whatever he needs to develop a skill or something like that. It's just like one of those guys that like I just think he's going to be better in a different setting where there isn't this cloud of doom kind of hanging over everything, even though things are really good, or I don't know about really good, but like as good as they have been in a while in Brooklyn. That I think is probably where I see him thriving a little bit more. And like right now he's being played out or outplayed by Yuta Watanabe. So it's like,
Who I
that's
love,
what
by the way.
I love.
I
do
that
too.
dude. Yeah. So he's do you think Yuta Watanabe makes the roster then?
I hope so, man. He's looked pretty good. Yeah, I mean, that would be, I think you want to add another guy like that just is, it fills that wing position for you, especially when you don't know what you're getting from TJ Warren. And, even Joe Harris is kind of like, oh, let's hope his ankle's good. Like I would hope they bring him aboard and keep him kind of involved in this team.
He just reminds me so much of Kenrich Williams in many ways, probably a
Mhm.
scaled down version at this point because he can fill so many different gaps and he's not going to be like a master of anything, but this team has masters of all these different things. They don't have enough guys. We're talking about Cam Thomas, just feels so redundant on this team. And
Yeah.
after some of the flashes he showed last year, I'm not a big fan of, oh, well, you need to get rid of this youngster. But if like you're sticking with this core and this is the direction you're headed, it might be time to like sell high in a different type of trade that gets you someone who fills more of the gaps that you need, which is complementary offense, but more so just like complementary defense for this team. That's why I really like Watanabe for them is when he's healthy. I just think there's just a lot of underrated mobility and positional malleability to him.
Yeah, for sure. I think you want as many guys like that as possible with like the top end talent that you have, where it's like we're not worried about offense. We're going to be top 8 in the league for as long as we have Kyrie and KD. Like after that, it's just like, let's get gap fillers. Let's get a guy like Yuta who can, slide up and down positionally, defensively, and rebound the ball. Like we just kind of want guys that are going to do that little extra stuff, versus a guy like Cam Thomas, who it's like, he's on a rookie scale deal. Probably a lot of teams that still look at this guy and say, yeah, this is like an interesting player if we get him in our system or whatever. The longer you wait on that, because I don't see a path for Cam Thomas to get more minutes unless Kyrie or KD is moved. So it's
We're
like
injured.
we're injured. Yeah, exactly. But even so, it's like I don't see a path for that. And in a sense, you're just appreciating the asset over time.
What is the defensive ceiling of this team? I look at the roster and I'm not impressed, but there are some things that they actually were like around bottom 10 outside garbage time points allowed per possession last year. And some of the things were correctable where it's like, if this team is healthy, it probably commits fewer turnovers. If they actually care about getting back in transition, so they're not allowing like 1 kabillion points per possession off of their turnovers. But what is like, how do you see them defending? What is the defensive ceiling? Are you concerned with the rebounding where they were one of the, if not the worst defensive rebounding team in the league last year? I guess with Simmons and Claxton minutes, you might be fine, but when you're playing one of them at a time, what are just the big, the flashbulb concerns or maybe highlights of how this team can, will, or won't defend?
Yeah. That's a good question. I'm probably a little higher on the team defensively than you. I think they can defend size a little bit better just because of bringing in Ben Simmons, bringing in somebody like Royce O'Neal and having him essentially take over for what you had Bruce Brown doing. Royce brings a little bit more size. He can guard up the positional scale a little bit. He's had defensive possessions against all types of guys. Giannis, he's had a couple against Joel Embiid over the years. Granted, these are like on switches. They're not intentionally putting him on these guys, but like he's a guy that can hold his own against guys that kind of tower over him. So I like that. I think that in that way, they'll be more set up to play against a team that grows increasingly larger. I will say in terms of scheme versatility, switching, I think, will be in, especially with Nick and Simmons comprising the front court. That's going to be really pretty much their bread and butter. Drop defense, we'll see. I haven't loved Nic Claxton as a drop defender ever. And I don't think they have the screen navigators that they did last year. DeAndre Bembry and Bruce Brown were great, especially out the gates, in terms of defending that way. This year, it's like, like Royce O'Neal can be good. Ben Simmons, a really good screen navigator. But there's certain teams like Philly, for example, with Tyrese Maxey, where there's just going to be guys that are so quick that they're going to get by pretty much everybody. And that's the stuff that I'm watching. Is like, all right, what does that look like? Are there certain teams that are just bad matchups for the Nets? But I think holistically over the year, I think they can be like top 10, maybe back end of the top 10 defensively. I'm pretty high on this team. Yeah, I like it.
I might be discounting maybe how many minutes I think they can get away with Nic Claxton and Ben Simmons, because if both of them are on the floor, it allows Ben Simmons to, one, defend the way that he's used to defending. And then that makes, I thought people were too hard on Royce O'Neal last year, where I was just like, look at like the burden this guy's fucking carrying. He shouldn't have to. That makes Royce O'Neal's job easier if he's going to play with that group. Top 10 is like, if this team is 18, if like, let's say 17th in defensive efficiency, what they should be on offense for a majority of their minutes, I would say, like, that ends up being like this supernova contender, because I look at them and I feel maybe I just don't have a high enough ceiling on them. You're probably closer there than I, but I do feel like their floor on defense for a team with Ben Simmons might be just a little bit shockingly lower than people are. I think they're just assuming that Ben Simmons comes in like the defense is, because of the way he plays, it's not going to be the Rudy Gobert punches your ticket to a top 10, top 12 regular season defense.
That's fair. Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. And I do think like they don't have like a just like, I don't know, like a Rudy Gobert to lean on in the back line. Like Clax is good. Like, don't get me wrong.
I love Nic Claxton, who statistically is like, well, just based off his coverage per B-ball index, like one of the most, him and Ben Simmons have been the two most switchable players of like the past 10 years. And so like that's, having both of them is just huge. For sure.
But I think the big thing is like, just, there are certain, I mean, drop defense in general, like tends to do pretty well in the regular season. Like it is a different game in a way. So I can see your argument for sure on them. Maybe they're more like 10 to 12 range. Still though, I think that's a huge win for them if they're in that range. And then if they can scale it up defensively a little bit in the playoffs, just by simply slowing things down and the game slowing down, and that switching scheme coming into handy a little bit more. I could see that kind of being hey, we're this like more mid-tier defense and we are kind of elevating things in the postseason.
If they are 10 to 12 and 10 to 12 in defense, the Eastern Conference trade deadline's arm race is going to be absurd, and you're going to see a lot of people shifting their like title picks by November, because everyone just assumes this team will implode. And so if they have that defensive ceiling, my God.
Yeah, I mean, like that's the whole thing with the Nets, right? Is like if they don't implode, if there's no injuries, which there always is with the Nets, if there is no internal drama, like this team is going to be really, really good, and like we should look at them as a title contender, like, and really give them a long look. Because you just watch the way they play. Everything's in place. The style of offense that they're running, in terms of all the motion they're running, it's a pretty good way to hide their deficiencies in terms of potential floor spacing in specific lineups, and this tendency to lean too much on their stars and burden their stars too much. And then defensively, you have guys that add a lot of dynamic positional versatility in Ben Simmons, Royce O'Neal. Let's bring up Yuta Watanabe.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. But no, like seriously, like it's all there. All the pieces are there, and they just offer a lot more than last year's team, where it's like you kind of know what you're getting from them and you know what you're not getting.
Are there any strengths about this roster that you don't think are receiving enough attention as we get into the regular season?
Yeah, I mean, I just think the ability to defend a little bit larger is the big one. And yesterday, I remember watching their opener last year in the regular season against the Bucks. And they tried to do this last year where they were like, we're going to play bigger. bigger meant playing LaMarcus Aldridge and Blake Griffin together. And it's like, that's not, I don't care that they're technically larger in size. They're more clunky somehow. And they're like, the Bucks are blowing by them offensively. And they're not rebounding either. So this year it's a little bit different where it's like, now we have speed, size, and, vertical pop. Like we have all of that in place with Nic Claxton, Ben Simmons, Kevin Durant. I can go on and on and on, Royce O'Neal. So that is a lot different for me this year. They have the right type of size, the size you actually want in the modern NBA, not just, hey, we have big guy A, big guy B, and we're going to say, let's go for it,
Oh man, I don't know how I just forgot about those front courts. I don't even think that would have worked in 2015 with those two, to be honest with you.
When they were playing Millsap and LaMarcus for a while there, and that was peak. That was peak early season Nets last year. By the way, they were like number one in the conference while they were doing this, dude, because Durant was just that good to start the year.
I will say the Paul Millsap decline over the past few years to the point where he's not even in the NBA anymore, that hurt my soul a little bit. He was just like one of my just favorites to watch, did everything, had like that sort of all-star stretch. And I thought he was going to age. Maybe it was a gradual drop off and I just didn't notice in Denver, but it just felt like towards the tail end of his time in Denver, it was just like, oh, all of a sudden Paul Millsap is his liability.
Yeah, I wanted Millsap on the Nets for like every year that I covered the Nets, and that was one of my biggest misses ever as doing creating content. Last year I was like, I think Millsap can be okay for this team. Like he's going to play less minutes. He was like starting a bunch of games at the beginning of the year for Denver. Maybe he'll look better in a reduced role. I could see this scheme helping a little bit. Things are simplified on offense, and it was like, no, he just was like, he was done like the first 10 games.
So we've talked a lot about some of the concerns of this roster. What's the biggest one in your eyes leading into the season?
Health. Probably. It's such a cop out, but it really is. Like, I don't know what else I'm supposed to pick other than be like, well, this team needs to stay healthy. I guess spacing, like I said, like a team like Boston where, that team is so honed in defensively. They're going to switch everything. They're going to ignore certain guys. All of a sudden, those minutes where I'm like, I think you can survive with Nick and Ben playing together. Those might really hurt. And then you have to figure out, okay, how much can we survive with Ben Simmons as our center? Is Robert Williams going to absolutely eat and get, just an assortment of lobs on the other end? Like that I think is the stuff where I'm watching that and saying that might be where you see the weaknesses a little bit.
And that's what I look at as like an on-court weakness. It feels like they might need a different big man setup. And I love Nic Claxton. Nic Claxton is one of my favorites. Anyone who listens to this podcast knows. But just, I guess every team in essence is looking for this. But like the floor spacing, rim protecting five is what this team kind of needs, because that would make everything so much easier with Ben Simmons, the way they want to defend against certain teams. You also want that big to then be able to hold up against if teams like Boston and Cleveland are going to run their dual big lineups, or if they're going to take one off the floor, you still would prefer it if you didn't have to take this center off the floor. And that player is very hard to find, but it feels like that player could make a world of difference on this roster. And that was not, I really didn't mean to just like a roundabout way of describing Miles Turner, but like that type of like a player would be like absolutely, even they wouldn't have gotten him for what the Knicks game, but like an Isaiah Hartenstein would have probably just been like really huge for this team too.
Funny thing about Hartenstein is that they were between him and Millsap last year. And boy, if you could,
I don't know that, I guess when the season went off the rails a little bit, but like, I don't know that they would have used him the way that the Clippers used him. So that maybe that's some consolation, but when you hear stuff like that, it's, it's not quite like, oh, Dallas was going to draft Giannis, but like you were choosing between Millsap and Hartenstein, and look what Hartenstein became. Like, just was this sort of under the radar 6th man of the year candidate with the way that he played last year.
Yeah. So, I mean, and again, like that team that season was destined to implode, I think, no matter what happened. But yeah, that's a guy that would fit really well. I know Nets fans are like really on a Mo Bamba train right now. Like, okay, like I guess maybe hypothetical. I don't know if you're a Mo Bamba guy. I'm kind of like,
I thought he had a really good year last season, and they were able to, like, he played a lot of minutes with Wendell Carter Jr.
Yeah.
I'd probably be on a basketball level if he was healthy, author slash basketball player Jonathan Isaac would make like a lot more sense for what this team I think actually needs. The spacing with him and Ben Simmons would be just absolutely atrocious, though.
He's like TJ Warren hologram status to me. Like I'm not sure.
I'm dying at that. Do we know that TJ Warren's not a hologram? It's more of a generalized question, and I don't necessarily like thinking about trades before we've seen this team actually play. But do you think just because this roster, if they stay together, they're very much win now, and it's Kyrie Irving's last year, will they be aggressive in making meaningful roster upgrades, or will there be a little bit of reticence there because, oh, hey, we almost just fucking imploded over the offseason. We don't know if Kyrie's going to be here past this season. And so I'm just wondering how that impacts their view of going for it this season. Is it we're willing to make material upgrades, or we're just going to stand pat and see where we lie?
I hope they do this, like, because they did this big thing where they took a stand and they're saying, no, like, let's be honest, like they spent the whole summer and we're like, we're not going to trade Durant. Like we're just going to hold out. So if you're going to do all that and not trade these guys or do a sign and trade for Kyrie, like, yeah, you should go all in and exhaust every single opportunity that you have. So yeah, I mean, like Miles Turner makes a ton of sense for this team, and really would fill holes for them on both ends that the remaining holes, let's be honest. So I would hope they do something like that if they have the opportunity.
I think I would believe Sean Marks probably has the agency and the gall to do it, but I just question like if that comes up. And so if they're a title, if they're hovering around that inner circle of the East, you absolutely have to. They're not, the James Harden trade like cycle that didn't work out too well for them. But if Ben Simmons is healthy, like you're not asset barren with like your draft equity anymore, and you have some contracts that could be used as matching tools if it turns out that one of Joe Harris or Seth Curry is superfluous. I don't know if they will be. So I do hope that if they are in that inner circle, there's not like a hesitance there, because I like seeing just teams go for it.
Right. And or hurt. Like if Joe Harris is just like, we just can't get this guy on the floor, like all of a sudden, hey, maybe we'd have our home for Cam Thomas. He'd be an Indiana Pacer. I'm in for that.
I need Joe Harris to stay with this team because I loved the vibes from like that Nets team that was just fucking going nowhere under Kenny Atkinson. He's still remnant from that era. Yeah. And I don't like Nic Claxton didn't really spill over to that. So like it's only Joe Harris now. So I need Joe Harris in Brooklyn.
Yeah, me too. And also like he's like a really perfect fit for what they're doing this year. So yeah, I agree completely.
One of my other favorite things to do leading into the regular season is try and figure out what the top 10 rotation looks like for every single team. The Nets gave me more of a headache than most teams, even when I presume health. It seems like they probably have 7 locks with Kyrie, Joe Harris, Kevin Durant, Ben Simmons, Nic Claxton, Seth Curry, Royce O'Neal. And then I had Patty Mills penciled in as a quasi lock. But he didn't have like the best close to the year last season. So are my 7 locks at least correct? And how would you flesh out those, final roster spots?
Yeah, I think your 7 are correct. The one I would say is I think Royce O'Neal could jump Joe Harris in the rotation. We'll see, but I'm watching that one pretty closely. Yuta Watanabe, I'm going to bring him up for the third time. I keep bringing him up. I think he could make it. I think he could. I could see him above Markieff. The Nets love Patty Mills. Like there is just such a bond there that I don't know. I just can't see Patty ever falling out of the rotation. But like Yuta's a riser for me. Him and a healthy TJ are the ones where I'm like, how high can we go with these two guys? I don't know if Yuta is going to be like your 6th man, but yeah, like could he get semi-regular?
I'm looking up his 6th man of the year odds right now. You said that. Aggregators, Matt Brooks from Nets Daily predicts Yuta Watanabe wins 6th man of the year award.
So yeah, I mean, I think you're pretty spot on with it. But yeah, the big one I would say is like, could Royce jump Joe Harris? How high can Yuta jump in the rotation? And like, does this team ever hit that point with Patty Mills where they're like, all right, we're really your minutes are going to be kind of like game to game? That would be the 3 things I'd watch for.
I guess he would be though, like the vibes guy in the locker room. Who else would it be? That's like it's not Ben Simmons and it's not KD and it's not Kyrie. Yeah. It's like, who's that locker room player voice and just like good vibes person? It would have to be Patty at this point.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's probably who you're looking at in that way.
So this is to some extent matchup dependent, I think, especially for this team. But what do you think winds up being their go-to crunch time unit, which very much feels like the 3 locks are in place? Ben Simmons, Kyrie, and KD. You're not having those guys on the bench in crunch time. Like either any one of those guys on the bench in crunch time, I would imagine anyway.
Yeah, maybe Joe and Royce filling it out. Personally, I mean, I
lock for me, just as
yeah.
like who is the other guy who is the wing defender on this roster, and it's without TJ Warren healthy, it's him basically, or Watanabe. Might as well just throw him in there. You know?
Fourth bench. I guess. I mean, it depends on the team. Maybe you can get away with Nick against certain teams. Bucks were a good example. But yeah, I mean, I think you want to put as much shooting around. Like that's where I can see those Ben Simmons at the 5 lineups happening.
Is there a weirdo, bonkers, quirky, off the beaten path lineup you want Steve Nash to try this year?
Kyrie. Let's see. I want to see a weird lineup where they just put as much shooting around Ben, but one of them's a star. So like we were talking about, like, all right, the Matt Moore, fuck it, we're shooting the ball lineup around Ben. So you go like Seth Curry, Joe Harris, maybe Royce O'Neal or Patty Mills, Kyrie. So you have like some dynamic creation, and then Ben, and just like the super small, like shooty off ball, you know, sprinting around each other lineup. Like that would be the weirdest one. And then I guess you could also just replace KD for any of those guys, but that's like less fun. I want to see like a bunch of small guys and Ben Simmons play together. They get killed defensively, but it doesn't matter.
I think that was my pick too, even though I don't think that Ben Simmons should be running his own lineups because I don't want a star in it, but I still need, it's almost like morbid curiosity where it's like, what if it's Ben Simmons, Joe Harris, Seth Curry, Royce O'Neal, and Yuta Watanabe? Like, let's go there. And what does that unit look like? Maybe Watanabe's not enough of a shooter. So am I skewing Cam Thomas there? A healthy TJ Warren, but like give me, I guess you go Patty Mills. That would be a real flex. Patty Mills, Joe Harris, and Seth Curry on the court at the same time with Ben Simmons and Royce O'Neal. That would be literally Ben Simmons and just 4 guards or 5 guards if you consider Ben Simmons still a guard. So I just want to see what ends up happening. I don't think it would actually be particularly great, but maybe I'd be wrong.
Or maybe it would be like the other one I'm thinking of is I'm going to call it the fuck off you're not scoring lineup, where it's the Nic Claxton, Ben Simmons, Royce O'Neal, Kevin Durant, Yuta Watanabe lineup, where it's just like we're going to be Raptors.
You know what? That still ends up probably being like a okay offensive unit because Kevin Durant exists and he's just like a superhuman. Oh man, I want to see that one now too. I didn't even think of that.
Yeah.
So as we record this, their current win total is set at 51.5. Would you hit the over or the under on that?
I mean, I'm Mr. Optimist on this podcast, so I feel like I have to. I've basically said they have no flaws and we should take them seriously. So yeah, I don't know, man. I like the approach so far. I mean, it's early, like we're coming out of media day and preseason. So like, this is going to be about as high as you can be as a team, ideally, unless you're, I don't know, the Phoenix Suns or somebody like that. There's actually a lot of bad vibes teams right now, but the Nets are actually weirdly not one of them right now, which I'm not used to. So I'm just riding the high. I do think they're going to win over that.
I didn't care what the number was. I think it might have been at 53.5 at one point. It could drop to 49. I'm just taking the under. I don't trust this team. I recognize what their ceiling is, and it's the best team in the NBA. But trying to think of the realistic outcomes, I'm just expecting disaster. And it's not, I don't have an agenda. I'm not biased against the Nets. I don't know how you're supposed. I would never, let me make it clear. I would never bet anything on this team. I'm not investing in, I'm just staying away from everything because I think, and this would be the question, their range of outcomes is clearly the widest in the entire league, right? There's no other team that has a wider array of conclusions.
Yeah, I mean, I've laid it out. Like it's guys get hurt, Nash gone, which maybe isn't the worst thing. Maybe you get one of these assistants that's like really good. But
I didn't even ask about that. Is there like a chance that Nash gets on the hot seat before like the roster itself would be like Nash would go before they start selling off, like they're considering trading Kevin Durant or even moving Kyrie Irving at this point, probably.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, that seems like the first thing you're gonna hit before you do any of the bigger kind of major moves like that.
And I guess let's just assume they stay together. How many teams are you prepared to say are better than them in the East? Like, where would you they stay together? Where do you see them landing in the Eastern Conference?
Top 3, I think. And it's probably I like Boston still. Everybody wants to, it's too much happened in Boston.
If Robert Williams III's knees weren't made of jello, I would probably like Boston a lot more. But like Al Horford's 36. You don't have Gallinari, and now all of a sudden we're like, well, look at what Noah Vonleh and like Sam Hauser are doing.
No, I'm
and
loving the Noah Vonleh.
As Noah Vonleh as like that. I think that was that 2019 or 18 with the Knicks.
Yeah.
I was in love with Noah Vonleh, and then he just fell off the face of the earth again.
Yeah. No,
I blame Minnesota for that, in case anybody cares.
I blame the Nets. The Nets gave him a 10-day, and they never gave him a shot. I'm like, we should give Noah Vonleh a look here. Like, that was like right after they made the Harden trade, and they were just bringing in like names because they just didn't have any players left. It's like, oh, Noah Vonleh's a net.
He's
Andre Robertson.
Millsap at this point.
Yeah, pretty much. So, so I mean, I don't know. I think Boston is in the mix. I like Milwaukee. I'm just like, they're like the safe, like obvious pick for everybody because it's like the East is so up in the air. I don't know. They're like a year older, just a little, gotta keep it an eye out.
I would put Milwaukee above the Nets just because Giannis is a superhuman. And I think that they're, even if they're not caring about the regular season, they're a regular season machine. And look, Giannis didn't win the championship last year. So that means that he is clearly motivated by his failure. And so I just expect that team to be gangbusters. But that being said, everyone else in the East feels either a lot of things have to pan out in their favor. Like Donovan Mitchell just hits in Cleveland right away, and the depth on the wings isn't an issue. Or it's combustible where it's Miami's older and like what does their bench look like with Caleb Martin starting now and no PJ Tucker to start for them. And then Boston, we've outlined some of that. Oddly, and we've talked about the Nets. Oddly, the second most stable team to me, like towards the top of the East right now, is the Philadelphia 76ers, which clearly means I'm doing something wrong, though, because Doc Rivers is going to play Montrezl Harrell way too many minutes, and it's going to be a nightmare. But I think I would only have, like, I'm penciling those two teams and maybe Boston as the teams that I would say, yeah, they're going to be better than the Nets. And I'm only confident in the Milwaukee part of that.
I don't know how I left Philly out. Philly is like a lock for a top lock feels strong, but they really feel like a lock for a top 3 seed to me. I think you're probably picking between one of Milwaukee and Boston to not perform as well. Boston for a reason of like the center rotation is really bad. It's like really bad. Or Milwaukee is like, maybe they coast a little bit. Maybe it does.
Lopez
maybe I'm
old.
Yeah. Like you look at, Lopez a year older. I mean, maybe Drew looks like a tiny bit older. I feel like Drew's going to age pretty well, but maybe it's something like that. All of a sudden your Wes Matthews minutes you got last year that were really good, those aren't there necessarily. George Hill's like playing. So it's like,
well, I mean, you hit it on the head. It's like, oh, this team is at the top. They're top 3 guys, even if you say top 4 with Pat Connaughton or Brook Lopez, even if they're top 6, you throw those guys plus Bobby Portis, who I inherently don't trust him, but he's been good for the Bucks.
Yeah, I trust him now.
They will end up needing like age 83 Wes Matthews or Joe Ingles at age 83 coming off an ACL injury and not playing until 2023, or does Serge Ibaka have to play minutes for this team, or is it George Hill, just Devon Carter? So like, once you get like past their top 5 or 6 guys, there are a lot of their depth is confusing is the way that I would phrase it.
Yeah. I just like, they haven't improved their team since winning the title. Like it bothers me a little bit. I'm like, I get it. Like, I understand this is your core, but like in a way it's like, I'm just waiting for the year where it's like, well, the Bucks kind of dropped a half level. And I just feel like it's going to happen if you keep rolling the same group of guys that were kind of in the middle of their NBA lifespans when they won the title. And if you keep doing that year after year, like at some point, this team is going to get a little bit older in terms of its depth. Giannis is going to be Giannis. And like that right there is enough for a top 4 seed pretty much any year. But, and Chris being healthy helps too. But, I just sort of look at this and I'm like, all right, there's going to be some slippage at some point. So is this the year? I don't know.
Well, at least we've established that the Nets shouldn't be tanking this season. That's the one outcome we know. That won't be happening.
Are we sure? Have you watched Victor Wembanyama?
Right? They own their own pick this year, don't they? Or no? Is it swap?
It's a swap with Houston. So maybe Houston gets the number 1 pick, and they can like hope that Houston is just like super hooper pilled, and they're like, we want Scoot. Like they just need to Jedi mind tricks them into it.
If they tank, it's with aspirations of no higher than the number 2 pick. Basically. Yeah. Is there anything we haven't touched upon that you think still needs to be discussed?
No, I think we nailed it. I think we touched on everything that happens with this disastrously interesting basketball team.
Yeah, they're going to be entertaining for one reason or another. I am more optimistic that the entertainment will come from basketball. Now, after reading you, talking to you, and then just look, we can joke. It's only preseason and training camp. Like, this is not the team you would have predicted to make it through training camp and preseason without shit happening.
Yeah, I know. Baby steps.
Matt, in case anyone skipped the intro, are you able to tell everyone where they can find you and all the great work that you do?
Yeah, just follow me on Twitter at Matt Brooks NBA. Everything's there: podcast, writing, video stuff. We'll probably get more into that stuff as the season starts, but that's where everything is.
I admire everyone who can do like the video breakdowns and identify the actual sets that are happening in real time. You do a fantastic job of it. So thank you so much for hopping on, and I will be pestering you again down the line. So thanks so much.
Please do. Thank you.